everyone, it's Sonia, and today I'm doing a full review for the entirety of the Septimus Heap series by Angie. It is 7 books, starting with Magic, Flight, Physic, Quest, Siren, Dark, and Fire. They all have Y's instead of I's in there. So that probably gives you an inkling of how fun this book series is. So this series is about a young boy named Septimus Heap, who's the 7th son of a 7th son, and prophesies to be a great wizard. Due to this, when he was born, he got stolen away so that the dark wizard of the time, Dom Daniel, could raise him as his own apprentice and, be the all-powerful ruler of the world. Simultaneously, the power structure of the monarchy was also being assassinated at that time, again by Dom Daniel, so the queen and the baby princess were also killed. Septimus's family, the Heaps, happened to come across an abandoned baby girl, and so they decided to adopt her as their own, and they named her Jenna. And the story officially starts off, I think 11 years into the future. The story starts off 10 or 11 years in the future after that fateful incident, with Jenna and the Heaps living their lives out after knowing that their son Septimus was taken/killed. And Dom Daniel is still in power. General darkness and turmoil is going on. That is the most I can give you about this series from the first book without spoiling the entirety of it. So that's my summation of the book series. I gave it about a 3.5 out of 5 stars. It's closer to a 3 stars, but 3.5 because in general, overall, the series was kind of nice. I bumped it up by 0.5. It was overall enjoyable. I read majority of these books in audiobook. The first one, Magic, I read 2 years prior, and the rest of them I read July and August. And that was kind of a unique experience. Reading the first book actually was really slow. It's like a 600-page middle grade novel. Of course, the font is like 14 points, so it's kind of large and it goes by fast if you're interested in it, but it went by really slowly for me. The writing style, although really endearing, kind of jumped around a lot, and therefore it was kind of hard to get a clear-cut picture. It's told in third-person omniscient point of view, and so things kind of transition strangely. There's no linearness to why it changes from one situation to the other, although it is chronological. So listening to it on audiobook is a completely different experience in my opinion. The narrator does a lot of voice impressions, so that makes it a lot more dynamic. Instead of having a static, monotone narration voice, he's doing a lot of inflections and accents, and there's emotion to it, so that makes it a lot more interesting. And also, I think the audiobook continuity is kind of masked. The issues with continuity that I had were kind of masked by the fact that it was in audiobook. I don't know why, but it seemed to make significantly more sense to me in audiobook than it did when I was reading the first 6th and 7th books in hard copy. This book series actually gives you surprisingly complex characters. Not to say that middle grade gives you flat 2-dimensional characters. Middle grade is surprisingly dynamic nowadays. Alongside YA, you get a lot more well-rounded characters. There tends to be more of an inclination towards teaching moments and lessons that are more open as opposed to being embedded in the storyline. There's a moral clearly mentioned as the narration goes on, and that was pretty apparent in this series. All the characters over the 7 books have dynamic arcs. Everyone comes across their own individual struggles, participates in the main book's main conflicts, has an active role, and almost every single book has a new character that's introduced as a main character. The character was either there in the sidelines and then became a main character, or is completely new but becomes a significant part of the plot. And they don't just disappear, they stick around, and by the end of the book, everyone who's been mentioned has a dynamic arc in the middle and then has a decent conclusion, which was really nice to see. No one dropped off the face of the earth. no one dropped off the face of that fantasy verse. Everything had an explanation for it. All the characters' reasons to be there and to change were all in the plot, apparent and relevant, which was fantastic to read. And they're all flawed, and some of them have a gray morality, which is also really nice to read. There's no black and white morality in a lot of these characters. Everyone has their own motivations, and sometimes you tend to understand, if not empathize and sympathize with what they're going through. And one of my favorite parts actually was the fact that there were present adult mentor and parent figures, which is fantastic because you don't usually see that in a lot of YA and middle grade books. Most of the parents tend to be dead and or bad. Not fun to read, honestly. Silas and Sarah Heap, the two parents of the Heap kids, although they're kind of spacey and scatterbrained a lot of the time, are loving and caring, and they love their children. They want to be participating in their children's lives. So obviously when their kids end up in dangerous situations, they're concerned, they're panicked, they're reason to be scared, act out, say stupid things, their unwillingness to believe that their kids have done something bad or dangerous is all realistic, like very real and very earnest. So Marcia, who is the extraordinary wizard of this little monarchy fantasy world, is a well-rounded character. She is caring, she is authoritarian, she is responsible, but she also has a major hubris and pride issue that plays into how a lot of her conflicts play out, which is actually really nice to see. And then that, over the course of the book, affects different situations differently and affects her differently, and there's character development there as well. Just overall, the adults were fantastic to read about. There's a couple others, but they're spoilers, so I won't mention them. Even the magic system was really fascinating, but there were a couple of spotty issues with it. It's there in the first book, and then just kind of disappears for the rest of the book, so I don't know what's going on with that. There was no real explanation, so it's there, like the magic system's there, but it's confusing and unexplained, and that's a little bit frustrating. Yeah, so this is a genuinely fun series to read. It's not the best thing in the world. It is absolutely no Harry Potter, although there is a character named Bertie Bott, and I could not shake the fact that that was taken from Harry Potter, because this series started in 2005, but it's definitely really fun to read. It's cute, it's heartwarming, it's nicely written, I think, and I enjoyed it for the most part. So if you do want to go ahead and read it, go do that, because I'm going to jump right into the spoiler section. Leave and come back when you're done reading all 7 of the books. It's going to take a while. For those of you who don't care to read the book series, or have already read it, stick around. I got more to talk about. So one of the main things I really want to talk about is the world building. It's set in this magical world, and it's a monarchy kingdom that's really small. Like, the entirety of the kingdom palace is where majority of the things happen, except for when Septimus and all go out on quests and things like that. But there is also a world beyond that that's kind of unexplained. There is indication through the characters Snorri Snorkelson and Jenna's biological father, and then Ginny, called Jimmy. Yeah, okay, let's talk about that later. That there is, through these characters, there is an indication that there's a world similar to the way our world operates, with like countries and nationalities, races and ethnicities corresponding to where in the latitudes you are. Like, it seems to be there. Snorri seems to come from Nordic descent. Ginny is obviously straight up from the Middle East. In the audiobook, the narrator read him in this really awful stereotypical Indian accent, and I wanted to slap the guy and Angie Sage for a hot minute right there, but it's fine. No, it's not fine, but I'm just gonna not dwell on that. Further down in the books, though, some weird shit happens with the world building. There's a mention of moon expeditions, but the characters dismiss it, saying, oh no, you know that that's a myth. Submarines, and they treat it like ancient, unknown technology. There's elevators, and then the Chamber of Fire, I am pretty sure, is a massive fucking furnace. So what the heck? None of this was explained, and I don't know if she goes into the Pathfinder series, if she goes into the sequel series and explains the world building, but there's all these little Easter eggs left that imply that our contemporary world, something happened that led into this magical world that exists now, that thrives off magic. The book Physic is actually talking about chemistry, physics, and biology, like the science arts, that were condemned due to the great alchemic disaster of whatever year in this verse. Contemporary ideologies exist, but in the past of that verse, and there's absolutely no explanation of how the world ended up there. And that frustrated me to no end because I really wanted to know. This would have made this series so much more fantastic. Okay, it's really hot. I'm tying my hair up. It would have made the series so much more interesting if she talked more about that. But I guess there's limitations to what a middle grade can go into, so she didn't. But I was kind of really annoyed by that because there were so many elements that could have been expanded on, but they just were swept under the rug. Another thing that I like about the world building is that we're kind of existing in a matriarchy. The queen gives birth to a daughter, and the oldest daughter is the one that succeeds, and she's allowed to take a husband from any class of life, which is fantastic. A little bit heteronormative, but whatever. It is implied in the books that if a queen gives birth to all boys, then there's no one to take over the throne. And I want to know what happens in those cases. And then we have Marcia, who's an extraordinary wizard. There's histories to the extraordinary wizards that implied they were both genders. So there's like this flexibility in the world being, equality of both genders being in powerful positions. Aunt Zelda, who holds the role of the caretaker, has been one of all in a line of several women who have been caretakers. But then she gives her post on to Wolf Boy, or what was his name? He takes on the name Marwick at the end of the book when he figures out who his family is. Yeah, so she gives it on to Marwick, who happens to be the first boy to be a caretaker, and the implications of that are really profound. It implies that, women aren't the only caretaker figures, that women can be powerful and apathetic to kids, and then men can also be compassionate and take on the role of caretaker and be loving and, wholesome, pure flower children of this world. And that message is just wonderful, and I love that. And going back to Septimus, his life is kind of traumatic. He got kidnapped at a very young age, got recruited into the young army because he was considered abandoned, got trained in the forest and through all kinds of dangerous situations, and essentially was alone and without friends. Finds his family, who accepts him. His oldest brother tries to kill him, forced to time travel back in time, gets sent on a murderous quest. Like, this boy has been through shit, and it's evident. Like, all books have somewhat evidence of post-traumatic stress disorder for this young boy, and that is nice to see. It's not swept under the rug. He's not shown as completely resilient. He has flashbacks, he has moments of indecision, he has moments of insecurity. He has fears of being thrown back into those traumatic situations, and that's nice to see, that it's accepted, it's not hush-hush. The contrast between Septimus, Merrick, and Wolfboy / Marwick is also fantastic. Merrick had an all-powerful identity, was forced with an identity of being great, lost his entire history and his entire life because of one massive fuck-up, and being raised by an awful human being. This boy is alone, insecure, doesn't know who he is, and therefore all these things leads him to do some really scary and terrible things. And although there's no excuse for the bad things he does, there's an explanation, and it's not treated as, oh, poor kid. It's treated as, dude, what the fuck? Like, we know you've been through shit, but you can't go around killing people for that. Like, all of his decisions stem from a desire to prove that he's worth it. And, like, I really like that aspect of him. Septimus, on the other hand, goes from having absolutely nothing, no hope, no future, to finding a family, a legacy for him, and responsibility that he grows into. Whereas Marwick, Wolf Boy, starts off with no history and continues on throughout the series with no history and accepts it. He's fine with the fact that he has no identity. He's made one for himself through like the name Wolf Boy. He's found friends, and then he finds family, and he accepts that too. He builds that into his character. The contrast of these three boys is just really wonderfully dynamic. And there's also Septimus's foil in Jenna, where she's never been wanting of anything. Although she grew up in the poor Heap family, she had 6 brothers and loving parents. Then she goes on to realize that she's queen, but her background of being with the Heaps feeds into her desire to not actually become a queen. She just wants to be a young girl who can do what she wants, but over the course of the books, things that happen to her, things that she goes through, make her grow into the identity of a queen, and that's just so beautiful to see. Although Jenna did get on my nerves a little bit when she started getting annoying and prissy about being queen, but it's bound to happen. It's understandable. They're like 13-year-old kids. They turned adults at 14. Like, what the fuck? That was hella fucking weird. Beetle was actually a fantastic character. His friendship with Septimus is very much Ron Harry-like, where he tends to be a little jealous that the fact that everyone wants Septimus to be around, and Beetle was just there as a secondary backup plan, but he qualified young boy. He loved his old job, and then he goes on to basically taking on the job of his old boss, and I'm just so happy for everything that happens for him. Only thing I was weirded out by was the last book where, you know, his crush on Jenna actually kind of amounts to something. I would have been fine assuming that Beetle was maybe like 1 or 2 years older, but then you realize that the age of adulthood is 14, and that Septimus is like, oh, but she's 14 now, you can totally ask her out. Like, how much older is Beetle then? Like, that entire situation really weirded me out. I'm just gonna picture the fact that Beetle is 15, and so he's 1 year older than Jenna, and it's not creepy. One thing that I really wanted to mention was the Jimny. His history also was only slightly touched on in the text, and then also a little bit in the afterword and like the after sections of the last book. Jimny, in all sense of contemporary ideology, is a trans man. When he looks back over his previous life, so I'm guessing this is something to do with reincarnation and some botched up inclusion of Middle East / Indian culture that I don't even want to think about. I guess the intent was reincarnation, but I'm just gonna consider his character to be trans representation, because that just makes me feel a lot better, as opposed to talking about appropriation. It was approached kind of nicely. If you consider it through the lens of a transgender person, he seems to have come to terms with his past life, has accepted his former identity as his former identity, and is happy with the way he is. I just kind of really like that, but the implications of Jimny being like a slave to Septimus, and Septimus not being allowed to show compassion even though he felt for him, was low-key fucked up. There's some real messed up implications with ownership and just superiority and slavery and all that I cannot believe is actually implied in a middle grade book, but he's not a human, he's a fantasy character, so I'm guessing it's supposed to be ignorable, but I don't like what that implied. Another thing that I really disliked was the witches. They were all ugly, decrepit women, and the way you become a witch is if you kiss another witch on the lips, and that's considered icky. Ha! So, thanks for that. Like, that's really nice to see. Great representation, but that was probably not the intent. It was not thought clearly through. So I'm just gonna decree that all witches in the Septimus Heap universe are women-loving women. That's gospel. We have bisexual, pansexual, lesbian witches. Take it or leave it. Done. In all honesty, this series was kind of fun to read. I enjoyed audiobooking it. It was a great, step away from contemporary, going back to middle grade. Out of the entire series, I think books 6 and 7 were the best. There's a lot, the story becomes significantly more dynamic and there's more complexity to the narrative, and book number 4, which is Siren, was just the absolute shit. It's the most predictable book of the lot. As the title implies, they end up stranded on an island with a siren, although the siren's a ghost or a phantom or predictable. I think if you don't want to read the entire series, Siren is the one you can skip. Just Wikipedia what happens, make sure you remember the names, and just proceed from there. Aside from the slightly racist and slightly homophobic undertones, we're just going to pretend that it's an all-round good series. 3.5 out of 5 stars. That's what I give it. That is all I have for you today in this rather long review. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you consider reading the Septimus Heap series with a grain of salt. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!